So thank you very much, Derek and Gianetta, for being on this episode of Musical Chairs. The purpose of this podcast is to be able to give more information to aspiring musicians and existing musicians to give them a little bit more information regarding all sorts of different topics related to music. And today's topic is more centered around the different categories of musicians, and namely concert artists. So the first thing I'd like to do is just ask each of you, what facet of the music industry do you focus on? What is your area of expertise, and what credentials do you have? So Gianetta, if you don't mind, we'd love to listen to your experience here.
Oh, thank you. So I've been a professional harpist for over 40 years now. And so my career certainly spanned a lot of time and taken a lot of shifts in direction over that length of time. I studied, had the great fortune to start studying with Judy Lohman in Toronto, although I grew up in Edmonton, when I was 10 years old. And to be working really from such a young age with such a great artist was really probably the greatest gift of my early career. Well, I have to say my whole life. She and I still work together. And I did, at that time, there was no Royal Conservatory for exams or anything like that. So at least for the harp. So I did eventually, then I went to the University of Toronto and did a Bachelor of Music in Performance there. And after that, went and did some studies for about a half of a year in France with Catherine Michel and Pierre Jamet, who was one of the real masters of the 20th century on the harp and premiered several of Debussy's works for the harp. And so it was obviously an incredible opportunity to get another perspective as well, because my training with Judy was from one, let's say, school of harp playing, and Jamet and Catherine Michel was more from the French school. So at that point, with the foundation that I had, such solid training, then I was able to work with other people and really sort of garner information, musicality, technique, many aspects of playing that really deepened my musical experience and my capacity to express from my own musical language, but with all of those different forms. But the primary essential aspect was that incredibly solid foundation that I started with.
That's a wonderful pedigree you have, for sure. That's
very
quite
fortunate.
So Derek, what is your experience in the music industry? What kind of credibility have you been able to develop, and where do you put yourself in the music world?
That's a loaded question, Michael.
Okay.
As a musician, I think one of the things that you have to do is to be very versatile, and you can't commit yourself to just one area. And for me, growing up, it was always about performing and wanting to become a performer. I had a great teacher here in Calgary, Lorraine Sharamata. She started me off and really got everything going, the excitement of music, the love of music. And then I had the pleasure of working with another very strong teacher here in Calgary, Brian Cross, before I moved out to Ontario and had a chance to study with one of the leading pedagogues in all of Canada in Windsor, Dr. E. Gregory Butler. And while I was there, I also had a chance to work on my pedagogy skills with Dr. Thomas Green, who is the current chief examiner for the Royal Conservatory of Music. And I had a chance to work with the late Joel Hastings, a Clyburn finalist, Canada Council Arts Grant recipient, just a phenomenal musician. And then I headed off to the Manhattan School of Music in New York City and stayed with Dr. Solomon Mikovsky and Dr. Don Alexander Fader. So two world-class teachers who just took everything to the next level. But along the way, it was it was great because every one of these teachers was able to take me to the next step that I needed, but also change and adjust my perspective in what music was, and learning that it's not just about performing. There's a market out there for skill sets that everyone can acquire. So it could be teaching, it could be being an adjudicator, being an examiner, it could be a mentor. So for me, I feel very lucky to have worked with some phenomenal teachers who have really shaped my career, and I thank them a lot. And at the same time, the career continues to grow. It never stops. So I'm supposed to be in Italy today. I was supposed to fly there yesterday to teach,
Wow.
perform in Cremona. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, the festival was canceled, and Cremona happens to actually be the epicenter of where the viral breakout was in Italy. So myself and my faculty who would be in Cremona are very sad that we're not there today, but we're looking forward to being back there next year, making music in Cremona, the city of islands.
That'll be quite the experience. Yeah, absolutely. So what's very interesting is listening to both your experiences in the music world and your education. There is a lot of pedigree involved. And one thing that the music industry in certain areas, like for example, electronic music and whatnot, a lot of these successful musicians are self-taught. Whereas when we're talking about more of the classical world, there's a lot of pedigree involved and these unique experiences that get passed down from teacher to teacher. And this is something that I think this interview will be excellent in portraying to, again, future musicians, aspiring musicians, or just existing musicians as well, to maybe even seek out certain individuals. So I guess the first thing that I would like to get into is the question of, what does it mean to be a musician? Because again, this is also a bit of a loaded question, but there are so many different areas of the music industry that it would be great to portray the possibilities for future students. So maybe going back to Gianetta, what is your perception of being a musician?
You know, again, over the years, my perception has certainly changed and become broader, let's say. Like Derek, you know, I started primarily being expected to become a performer. And that was really what it meant to be a musician, right? To get on the stage and share what I had learned and my capacities. Really, with time, my real understanding of it is an opportunity, a method, a tool for communication. And so for me, it is my most, let's say, easy language of communication. Not to say that it's easy, but I find it, especially on the harp, it has a capacity to connect to people on a different level, let's say, than a lot of the superficial language that we deal with, and intellectually, even emotionally. And so really, it's for me a way to communicate who I am, to create relationship with whoever is receiving that which I'm communicating to them, and then how I receive that back. It's very much, it's about relationship, and as well about living creatively, finding ways. I feel very graced to be able to be a musician, to have a career that actually it challenges me. Again, like Derek was saying, with these different aspects in our careers, there's so many different parts of it. It gives us the freedom as well as the challenge to live a creative and, I would say, a courageous life. And I think, again, as I age, I hope that I can share that perspective and communicate that perspective to whoever I'm working with, and give them perhaps courage to live their authentic true life, whether it's through music or whatever else.
It's very interesting that you say that over time, your perception of what a musician really is and what they do has changed. And it's almost as if the more we know, the less we know, which we hear that all the time. But in this case, it's real. You've lived it. And as musicians, we do see like how broad this industry really is. So this is, I think, a question that we could probably talk about for a very long time, and it will always change. But it's very cool to see where we are at this moment and how we perceive music to be. And for yourself, Derek, what does it really mean to be a musician?
Well, I echo a lot of what Gianetta has mentioned, and the communication is probably the most important thing at the end of the day. The goal for me is out of practice is so that my communication becomes more effective, so that the message I'm sending, whether it's Bach or Chopin, is actually the message I want it to be, right? I mean, we may have all these great ideas in our mind, but without practice and trials and playing things through for your friends and playing things through for your teacher, we don't know if that message is going through to your audience. And relationships, for sure. I mean, it's not just a relationship between me and my students and me and my colleagues. I have a relationship with every composer I study. I have a very deep relationship with Mozart, very deep relationship with Liszt. I'd love to have a greater relationship with Prokofiev, right? So there's certain composers that you really just have a really wonderful bond with. You have composers that you want to develop a bond with. And then there are composers where you're just like, I'm okay not really knowing you. I'm okay with not touching your music. For instance, like Schubert, I don't have a great desire to play a lot of Schubert, but I enjoy listening to Schubert Lieder, and I enjoy listening to his chamber music and his symphonies and learning about him. But in terms of my own learning, I'm not fascinated about his piano music. So, and that's just like any other relationship. You just have certain friends, and then you don't build relationships with other people. So
Right.
Music really is about communication and relationships.
It's very interesting. Yeah. So both of you are talking about relating something to your audience, developing that communication, but it also sounds like over time you've really honed into certain genres, and in this case potential like composers and time periods of music that you can really focus on and develop a true sound, a true unique voice. Whereas when I'm asking that question, even to myself, like, what does it really mean to be a musician? I'm thinking almost superficially, like, well, you got to be able to sight read music, you've got to be able to listen well and play by ear and this and that. It's almost like that's a given. You have to do that for the foundation so that you can get to a level where you can communicate. Is that sort of what you folks are talking about? Like those foundations, they just have to be there? Or even maybe they don't quite have to be there, because again, sight reading can be 0 to an infinite position where you can literally play anything by looking at it, or you can play nothing, and then there's gray area in between. So looking at just some of those maybe superficial things might not be the best way to answer that question. It's more directed to an open concept of communication. Is that sort of what we're looking at here?
I think so. I think every instrument has its particular needs and challenges as well. And certainly on the harp, I mean, your sight reading is a great example, because it's extremely difficult to sight read on the harp because of some technical mechanical aspects of it. That said, that's one of the things that we really have to work at developing and is essential. So it takes the discipline to learn how to do that. And if one can be a good sight, develops that capacity to be a good sight reader, a great sight reader on the harp, then that is a skill that is extremely highly valued based on some of the situations that one might face as a professional musician. So that's something that even with my students, I really work on that to make sure that they have that ability to use that tool. They have that tool. But like you say, these really are tools, that foundation, the discipline that it takes to build that foundation that then we can communicate with. So all of those aspects in order to communicate.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, if you don't have that foundation, it's like building a house. It's going to fall over real quick, especially under pressure. As Gianetta and I both know, it's not something that you can just take for granted, which I think happens in a lot of music education nowadays, is that students aren't trained. They're not given the very detailed, careful steps on how to acquire these skills. It's just go home and practice this, or let's just be able to do this and pass an exam, or whatever it may be, or let's try to win a festival, win a competition. I mean, it's not that. It's about developing this lifelong journey of loving music and growing with the music, but it has to start somewhere. If you don't have good reading skills, you don't have good rhythm, your ear's not being trained the right way, you come to a point in your studies where everything becomes just too hard, and you probably don't want to continue anymore. It becomes it becomes a chore, in fact, and that's the worst thing as a teacher, when you see a student who's doing these things and it's a chore, and it's not joy, and it's not love, and it's not about making music because it's fun. It's because it becomes a chore, and it's very sad. It breaks my heart every time I see that.
And I think it is very challenging now because young people are seeing that sort of instant success, or what they perceive as being an instant success. And the Got Talent, whatever all those shows are, and even if a person has won those shows, we haven't seen the process to get to that point for any great musician or artist. We don't see the process, we just see the finished product. And like Derek, my greatest joy, in fact, when I start, I from the very beginning, I say to a student, I want to give you the tools so that whatever you want to play, you are never going to hit a wall where your capacities fail you to be able to do what you want to do. And that includes not only the technical facility, but it also means body-wise. So that's a huge aspect. The number of other students, professional musicians, teachers that I know who at some point hit a wall, a physical one, because of a body misuse, let's say, that then stops them from being able to play. And there is no, I truly believe there is no need for that if we use our bodies mechanically in a healthy way. So that's an essential part of training as well.
Well, you both touched on the capabilities of musicians, and that comes from the foundations. So you can have a bad foundation that will limit you. That's basically what I'm hearing here.
Definitely. I mean, it's very hard to overcome. It's a lot of work, and there's very few people that are able to overcome a bad foundation. That's not music. That's everything in life. That's sports. That's education. No matter what it is, if you don't have that solid foundation, it's going to be a major obstacle that you have to physically and, more importantly, mentally overcome. And I think that mental part is the hardest part for a lot of people. They just don't have that willpower to fight through and get to that next level. And that's the same thing for professional musicians. Sometimes you get to a point where you just don't want to fight anymore. Actually, you've done enough of it, and you said, okay, that's it. I want to do something else. And I have friends like that who've gone very far in their careers and then just decided that that was it. They played their last concert and they wanted to do something else. And then again, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it.
I totally agree. And I think we all change over time. You know, I mean, I fell in love with the harp when I was 3 and I started lessons when I was 10. And I know in my own place where I am now, it's, let's say at the back end of my career, that I have lots of other interests, and I still love playing and I still enjoy a lot of it, but I'm eager to explore other aspects. But I think it's a little bit different from that hitting a point, hitting that wall, you know, that can stop you or can create that just the level of absolute frustration because you just can't, you don't have the skills, you don't have the tools to move over that wall. And as Derek says, that challenge when you're faced with that. I mean, I've had some students who have recognized that wall and wanted to make the changes to, you know, to be able to continue, and given up. And I've had some who have said, no, I want this much. I am going to do everything I need to do to make that happen. And the discipline that it takes and the patience, not only for the students, but for the teacher as well, to go through that process. I can tell you, I really love it when I'm working with my students who I've started right from the very beginning, and rather than getting the ones who come to me with challenges that we need to resolve before we can go further. That is a really, really hard road. And,
well, both of you are professional musicians, and you both touched on the fact that there are extracurricular activities that should be part of your life so that you can continue being that professional musician. So just briefly, I wanted to kind of segue into there. What sorts of things do you do on your off time that is not related to music, but benefits your musicianship?
A lot of different things in my life. I already mentioned the body work, so I'm very active physically. I chose to move downtown, and so basically live on my bicycle. It's my primary mode of transportation, except when I have to move my buddy back there. The only reason
How heavy is that thing?
He's only 93 pounds, but he's a little bit awkward, you know. But that's okay. No, I haven't figured out a trailer yet. Who knows? I have an interesting project in mind that's percolating right now, so we'll see what comes of that. But that's a big part of it. Also, some yoga, Alexander technique, really always making sure that my body is working as well as possible. Healthy eating, for sure. Meditation, prayer, really time, discipline. I listen to a lot of podcasts, not a lot about music actually, although during this pandemic, it's been really interesting to see what's been out there. Some great podcasts actually that have given me some interesting perspectives for music and for my teaching. I have a poetry reading group that, you know, we just go deep once a week into a poem that's been chosen by one of us, and just getting that intellectual soul connection. Yeah, a lot of different things. Balance is essential and sometimes not quite that easy to maintain, but I think that discipline is absolutely essential as well to maintain the balance, to not burn out.
That makes sense. And then for you, Derek, I know we chatted about this in the past, about working out and doing resistance training and lifting weights. How does that play a role in your life as a musician?
I think just sitting on a bench for hours at a time, you know, you need a lot of strong core muscles to sustain you, right? Especially regardless of what instrument you play, because you want to minimize the muscles that are working. You don't want to be using every single muscle you have. It's exhausting when you're on stage to kill yourself that way. So having that good core. Prior to the pandemic, I was swimming a lot, not so much. Swimming is great because it teaches you how to breathe, and every phrase needs to breathe, and swimming is the best way. I watch a lot of basketball, love basketball, not just for the sport, but actually for the athletes. And there's people like Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan that inspired me because of their determination and their willpower. That to me is inspiring as a musician, to see these great athletes, people I admire, overcoming their obstacles. And probably my next greatest joy to music is, well, I have two, obviously hanging out with my kids and seeing what kids are like and being childish, and that comes into your music too, because you need to know when you're playing different pieces what the character is. And I think for adults, we have to become children again. We have to find what being silly and just doing dumb stuff feels like, so that we can translate it over to music. And for me, wine, I love wine, and I find that the intricacies, the different styles of wine, the different varietals, that comes into play in music, right? So the same details that a sommelier will have is going to have translate over to the same set of skills my ear has. And so if I can hear these little nuances in music, the sommelier can taste and smell the different nuances in the wine. I find that relationship very, very interesting, because it's your senses.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, because being in the liquor industry and having to taste a lot of different products, the palate gets refined. And I love when a lot of people say, I only play by ear. Well, that is one aspect of music for sure. And it does take practice. I don't believe it's something that we're born to do. We may have a slight affinity towards certain tastes, flavors, scents, sounds. But as you mentioned, it's one aspect of learning that the more you do and the more you focus on that subject, you take it to the next level. So it's interesting you bring up wine. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there's so much wine out there, right? There's so much great wine and great music, and unfortunately, in my lifetime, I'm not going to be able to, and I'm sure the same for Gina, I'm not going to play and learn all the great repertoire that's been written for us.
I thought you were going to say drink all the wine in the world.
Well, that's not going to happen for sure. I'm on a mission. I'll do as much as I can.
I have to say, I mean, there's I would say a broader spectrum of great wine than there is of great harp music. Derek is fortunate as a pianist; he has a lot broader repertoire to choose from than we do as harpists. So, although there is some earlier music, but this harp that I play on, the concert harp with the pedals, it's quite a modern instrument. And so it's more exploring the new wine, let's say, and encouraging young composers to be creative with their instrument. A lot of harpists, students that I have, really encouraging them to become harpist composers, because we need more great repertoire, and our great repertoire really comes primarily from the amazing harpist composers of the past, basically the 20th century, a little bit before that as well. I mean, there's certainly repertoire before that, but the real meaty repertoire is from 1900 on.
So there's an open invitation basically for new musicians. Yeah, you need it.
Yeah. And to work with each other. Again, that's the communication, the relationships. That's really exciting, because even though I've been classically trained, you move into a different mode when you're creating new music. And if you have a composer that you're working with who wants to explore, then we can come up with new language, new colors. And again, that's that foundation that I started with Judy Lohman, who was absolutely foundational in developing repertoire around the world for the harp, with the composers that she played in the Toronto Symphony for 42 years. And every young, talented composer that she worked with through that job, she would identify them and reach out to them and say, hey, you need to write for the harp. And so worked with him. So people like Murray Schafer, Glenn Buer, Kelly Marie Murphy, those people have all written great, really, truly great, internationally recognized works for the harp because of her approach to the instrument. So, and that's part of that legacy that we were talking about. So much more moving forward.
And composing is a big chunk of communication, really, right? I mean, you can play other people's works and relate that to your audience, but if you have your own sound, your own voice, that's a beautiful way to showcase that.
And takes a lot of courage. As a classically trained person back at, really especially sort of my generation. I don't know about you, Derek, if you had the opportunity or were encouraged to do any, even playing by ear. I mean, for sure, when I was growing up, it was play those black dots on the page, and that was pretty much it. And so about 15 years ago, I started playing my first notes that weren't on the page and trying melodies by ear, and now much more exploration in that direction. And it's very liberating. And that finding the voice, we can find it in another composer's music for sure. But I'm definitely enjoying that freedom that it's offering to discover my own really creative statement.
Yeah, I think I was 19 or 20, and I was going to school in Windsor, and one of my classmates, Mark Chico Bellino, who's now a doctor in Detroit, he was amazing improviser, played a lot of jazz, and he came up to me in the school and he said, "Derek, I need you to fill in for this gig." And I said, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" He's like, "Okay, here's my fake book. Show up at the Windsor Casino at 9 o'clock on Friday night and play for 3 hours."
Wow.
I looked at him, I said, "I can't do what you do." He's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You play Beethoven sonatas and Chopin ballades. Why can't you do what I do?" I was like, "I don't know how to read that music. I don't know how to improvise." And he looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. And he goes, "Okay, let's go to a practice room." And he opened up Autumn Leaves, and he's like, "Okay, so play this." So I played the right hand line, it was fine. And then he's like, "Okay, play the left hand with it." And I said to him, I was like, "Well, there's no left hand written." He's like, "Yeah, it's right there. It's the chords. Play those chords, right?" And I'd never done that before. And it's a shame, to be quite honest, to think of how far you get in your early teens and into university, and you can't read a lead sheet, right? And so after that, I was like practicing, doing it all the time, and realizing this is a great way to make some money in university, play a couple jazz gigs once in a while. I mean, I don't profess I'm a jazz musician whatsoever, because that's a completely different set of skills, but I feel confident now and competent enough to get myself around a lead sheet and to be able to jam and do some gigs and play with a bassist and a trumpeter and a singer and know what to do with that. And at the same time, from doing some of that improvisation, you learn so much more about what the classical musicians do. Like Mozart, he was always improvising, and Beethoven's improvising, Chopin improvised. And so for me, what I do now when I play a classical concerto, I've been doing this for about 10 years now, I write my own cadenzas. I mean, there's great cadenzas written out there by great musicians, composers, performers, but this is like Gianetta, like you find your own voice. So you take Mozart's concerto and then you put your voice to it through a cadenza. And one of the things I did a couple years ago, I played a Mozart concerto, C major, Elvira Madigan, K467, and it was on my mom's birthday. And so what I did was, in the cadenza for the last movement, I embedded Happy Birthday in there for my mom. So it's just a little, you can do that as a musician, right? But it comes back to what we were saying earlier. If you don't have a foundation for that, for your ear and through theory and having taken some composition lessons, then you can't have that freedom to have fun with the music and put your own personal stamp and put a spin on it where no one's ever heard it. And that's what you want in music, because when Mozart premiered his concertos, no one ever heard it before. So when I'm playing his concerto, people have most likely heard it, but I want them to hear something they've never heard in the performance, whether it's a sound or a color, or in this case, a cadenza. So a lot of fun you can have with music.
And it's also, it's scary, right? And so it really challenges us, to do that. And I incorporate that into all of my teaching in the summer school that I run now as well, where we're incorporating the basics of theory. What's the point of theory if we don't use it? You know, I learned my theory. I went through university and I played my black dots on a page, but they didn't really have any relation to each other. You know, so now I'm teaching basic theory right off the bat. And how does that relate to the harp? We're talking about that. You know, it's incorporated, and then how do we play around with it? And actually the improv, you know, neurologically, that happens in a totally different part of the brain. Oh, and that's another thing, neurobiology, studying, you know, all of that stuff is a really great way to learn about performing music, but also about teaching. But to get my brain working in that way, specifically now every day, I do my 35 minutes of technique, and then I improvise. It's the first thing I do to get my brain working from that really, you know, very focused physical action, then get the freedom and another part of the brain engaged, and then combine the two in the black dots or whatever I'm working on.
And both of you talk about like a different aspect of music. It's funny because I can't even count on my hands how many times I've been asked to just play random stuff and being told, well, you're a musician, you should be able to do it. Or you play the piano, like, can you play this rap song or whatever? And I'm thinking to myself, like any other skill, you have to practice it. And there's this perception that being a musician, you should be able to do anything. You should be able to play jazz, modern music, classical, improvise. But these are all facets in and of themselves that take a lot of time to get good at. And Derek was saying, like, reading the lead sheets, again, like if you've never seen that and you're reading sheet music all the time, how do you get around that? And so I guess the point that I'm bringing up is this can be very overwhelming for new up and coming musicians or people who just want to learn an instrument. That do they really have to know all this stuff so that they can learn music, or can they just focus on one aspect?
I don't think they need to know it all at once, but they need to know it. They need to have this desire to constantly learn and get better every single day. And if that's not the desire, then this is not the right path for you. Because in this world, we have amazingly talented people that play concerts every weekend. And that's the cream of the crop. Like, I know that I'm not going to be an Angela Hewitt or a Long Long or a Jan Lezecki. That's not my path, which is fine. But my path doesn't change because I'm not going to be like that. My path is still that I have to keep learning. Every single day there's something that I want to know. And I say to my students, when you go to bed at night, if you are better than when you woke up in the morning, if you know something more than you did in the morning, then you're heading in the right direction. Mm-hmm. So whether it's you learned an extra page to your piece, or you memorized the passage, or you started a new piece, or you're more adept at a certain oral skill, if you accomplish that in a day, you're headed in the right direction. And I think for all young musicians and aspiring musicians and existing musicians, if your goal isn't to improve daily, you kind of have to take a look at yourself in the mirror and say, why am I in this? Why am I doing this? Because I look at the path of all these great composers and how they kept changing, revolutionizing sound and technique, and how they grew, right? We talk about how Bach grows so much in his music, and Liszt did the same thing. And if we don't use those great composers as our role models, then we're going to be stuck. We're going to be stagnant.
Yeah, the curiosity is the core to living well and living vitally and creatively. And I think not just the composers, but also the performers, the great performers who are out there that we see. Derek already alluded to a few of them. Canadian ones, and other, the Yo-Yo Ma's as well of the world, or even people like Sting or whatever. Even in the popular genre, they're always learning. And for me, my role model, my colleague, my friend, my mentor, Judy Loman, you know, she is now 83. She just played a massive recital on Zoom last night. And I mean, there were about 300 of us attending online, and it was absolutely, I mean, we were left speechless by the creative capacity, you know, and it's because she loves music. She's still so passionate about it, and she wants to communicate, and she's teaching, and she's curious, you know, and determined to keep going at the age of 83. And her hands are so arthritic. You can even see it when she plays. And, you know, she says, I can't stop playing for more than 4 days because I wouldn't be able to get started again.
Wow.
And she teaches at a summer school that I run. And she actually hears me every year bugging the students about their 35 minutes of technique every day. And there have been about 10 years when she'd actually stopped doing them. She was still doing her skin. This is the technique that she taught me, right? And she had stopped doing them. And last year she came and she played an incredible piece that I've heard her play several times. And it was so much better than I've heard her even in the past. Not that she ever plays badly. It's always phenomenal. And I said to her after, I said, Judy, you never played badly, but like, what happened? That was unbelievable. And she said, well, you know, every year I hear you going on and on and on to the students about how they really need to do their technique every day. So I thought maybe I'd better start again too. So at the age of 82 or 80, I guess 81 at that point, she started doing her half an hour of technique again every single day. And you know, again, like to say, she was never playing badly, but her facility has just expanded incredibly again. And she's, you know, a greater and greater performer with every day. And we saw the results of that last night. It was just, as well, to see how many harpists from generations of harpists who were attending from all around the world who she had mentored or taught over the years. So I mean, it was really an incredible opportunity to see that, the length of a career like that and the impact that it's had on the world and will for generations to come. That's what's meaningful. That's, for me, that's what life is about, whether we're a musician, whatever we do in our life.
So the question of categories of musicians, I consider both of you professional musicians and concert artists. So first of all, what does it mean to be a concert artist? And Derek, if you could maybe elaborate on your position on that, because I know you do regularly perform, and pre-COVID, you were performing in front of audiences quite often. And as a teacher, you would promote teachers to regularly perform as well.
Yeah. Right before COVID, I had just wrapped up a concert in Los Angeles with Roberto Cani. He's the concert master of the LA Opera. And we played this real hefty program of a Mozart sonata, Prokofiev sonata, Ravel violin sonata. And then he decided, I need one more piece. And I remember I was staying at his place and he's like, let's do this. And he pulled out this piece by Paganini, Il Papiti. He said, I haven't played this piece since I was like 20. I used to win competitions with this. And then he started playing it. And he said, oh yeah, it's all coming back to me. And that comes back to what Gianetta was saying about the technique. I mean, he said that. He's like, it's my technique. I can still play this because of the technique. But I think that's one of the great things, and you have to be, as a concert artist, one of the skills is that on demand, you have to be able to get something together in short order and be ready to go, whether it's the next day or in 2 days or within a week, because that's what the audience is paying for. They're there to hear you. They're there to hear you communicate and build a relationship with you. And so being a concert artist to me is not about just going out there and making music. It's about building my relationship, whether it's 1 hour or 2 hours with my audience. One of my favorite memories was when I first traveled to perform in Cremona, and this was 3 years ago. And I was thinking, what am I going to play on these faculty concerts? There's so much repertoire. What should I play? And this little message in my head from Dr. Makovsky said, remember, play something from their country. He always said that when you travel to a country for the very first time to play a concert, play something from their country. So I was like, well, I don't really want to play Scarlatti. I didn't want to do any Barrio because I didn't really know Barrio. And I was thinking, well, I'll do something Italian related. So I'll do the Bach Italian Concerto. And then when I committed to it and just and getting ready for it, I was like, am I really going to do this? Am I really going to play this work in Italy in front of an Italian audience in the City of Islands? And I guess I said, I guess I am. So I did it. And it was an amazing feeling to perform it and to play it for that audience. And then the next day I was just out at a cafe grabbing lunch and enjoying a coffee. And this man came up to me and he's like, hi, Derek, I heard you last night. And I was like, oh, thank you. And he said, you're from Calgary? And I said, yes. I said, how do you know? He's like, I Googled you. Googled me. And then he goes, well, you know, Derek, I've been to Calgary. I'm like, great. How'd you like the city? He said, when I went, it was very cold. And I was like, yeah, that happens every year. And he said, well, I was there in 1988. And I was like, oh, so you were there for the Olympics? And he's like, yeah, I was on the Italian Olympic team. And I was like, oh, am I talking to this great athlete? He was part of the medical team for Alberto Tomba, the Italian skier.
It is skier.
So here we are connected in Italy, in his home, through music. And that's what I like about being an artist, is because every year I go back, or every time I go and play another concert in a city I've been to, that audience is still there and they're happy to see you and they can't wait to see you. And then they enjoy hanging out with you afterwards at the reception, enjoying wine and just chit-chatting and having laughs. That to me is one of the great things that we often forget about being an artist, is that you connect with your audience on stage, but you're going to connect with them off the stage as well. And that connection off the stage is what gets you to come back the next time, because they're the ones that tell the sponsors, we really want Derek or Gianetta to come back and perform and play a concert here. And so that relationship is so important to always have with your audiences. And they start following you on Facebook and Instagram and all these things, all these great ways now with social media to connect with your audience. So being an artist is not just being on stage. It's you're a professional 24 hours a day, because that's what your audience is going to see. So at any point in time, if you're not in, I guess, performance mode, you lose that title. You're not an artist anymore.
Yeah, and I really have to second that. You know, my word, I would choose what makes a concert artist is discipline, and it's just having all of those aspects together at all times. And I love that story, Derek, of you connecting with somebody this was, the next day. I mean, I've had those types of experiences as well. And, but also that connection on stage directly with the audience. And I think that that discipline and that preparation allows you the freedom to actually communicate and to be authentic, to not be on stage worrying about, oh, am I going to get those pedals wrong, or am I going to get through this well, or gee, I'm not quite feeling, ready for this, or whatever that might be. It's being free that you can communicate absolutely authentically, and that it doesn't, don't think it matters what kind of music you're performing, whether it's popular music or classical music, anything. It's that capacity to be real on stage. And I think that's what really makes a great artist, concert artist, popular artist. It doesn't matter. You have to give something of yourself, and to be that deep and that honest, it takes a lot of courage, and it takes that discipline to have that foundation that you can risk that, because you're very vulnerable when you step out on that concert stage. You're bearing everything. And it's interesting now that we have to do so much on Zoom, because I've found that there's certainly a reluctance of performers to allow recordings of live performances. and a lot of these Zoom conversations as well that are happening, and I'm having a bit of a hard time with that, because to me it seems a little bit like that when we switch to digital recording as well, that ability to put out perfect performances, perfect, over edited maybe could be a word as well, but where's that real soul? And that's something that I think a lot about now as we're in this situation with COVID, and all of the teaching we're doing. And again, like that concert that I heard last night of Judy's, and that was absolutely phenomenal and absolutely connected. So we need to maintain that, even if we can't play live concerts anymore. But I'm determined we're going to. Somehow we've got to make that happen, because there's nothing like being live in a hall with human beings.
I did a Zoom concert earlier, or it wasn't on Zoom, but it was on another streaming service, and it's definitely harder to communicate because you don't know who your audience is. I like walking out and seeing people smiling and looking in their eyes, and that's part of it. When you walk online, you stare at a camera, you have no idea if there's even anyone watching you on the other end, right? And you don't know what the reaction is. When you're on stage and you have people around you, you can feel their breathing, you can feel their emotions, it's a weird thing, but I do sense that there's some level, I'm sure you do too, Gianetta, that you just kind of, there's this nonverbal physical connection with your audience that just magically happens because of the music. And I miss that. Doing things online is great, but you're absolutely right. There's something special about being in front of your audience, because it's your time with them, right? They're giving you an hour or 2 hours of their time to spend with you, and to really get to know you in a way that very few people probably do, right? Mm-hmm. And no matter what you do online, I don't feel you ever, even with a great performance like you experienced, there's still something missing in that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that tingle almost. You feel the energy in a concert space, and it can be a small, I've played in many very small spaces and huge spaces, but there's something in that liveness, the transmission of the energy through your instrument. I mean, I call the fingers are a harpist's voice, right? It's that same, the breath just has to come out here, which is a really kind of a weird concept, but that's where it comes from. And we feel very intimidated is not the right word, but limited, let's say, by this flat screen in front of us. And I do hope that we do find ways to break down that barrier, or to communicate in a better way through these two-dimensional methods. And who knows? I mean, technology is changing all the time, but the experience of having a performer come up to you afterwards, and they are absolutely speechless, and all they can do is take your hands, and you take their hands, and the tears are just streaming. You don't need words. That's a relationship that has changed you both on a fundamental level that is, there are no words for that. You could call it a spiritual experience if you want to use that kind of terminology, because it is absolutely profound.
And to actually get to that point, that's true discipline. That's quite a commitment. And that being said, for aspiring concert artists, what kind of a time commitment, and again, it does, I'm sure, vary on many different variables. How many hours do they have to practice a day?
I would never say hours, because then you just stare at your clock and you think, well, I've done all these hours, how come I'm not there? I mean, it's relentlessness. I mean, Richard Good didn't have a career until his late 30s, early 40s, from what I remember. And he's one of the world's most renowned pianists right now. Great recordings of Mozart's and Beethoven concertos and sonatas. And it took him years. Not everyone is going to have a career at 18 or 19 or 20 like Trifonov Some take a little bit longer, and that's okay because it's about the journey. And one of the things that, that's why I don't like to say time and hours of practice. It's sacrifice. Like, how much are you willing to sacrifice for this dream of yours? I mean, are you willing to put everything aside and make this the most important part of your life? It's hard. That's why it's challenging for a lot of people, because again, as human beings, we have so many other interests, and the basic interest of having friends and companionship and that socialness, that's one of the things that I think we all have to put aside at some point in time and be able to, it's hard to say, yeah, the music is a little bit more important right now. That's always been hard for me to do. And especially when you have a young family like mine, and then you disappear. I'm gone a good chunk of the year, and it's hard on my wife, it's hard on my kids. And so COVID's been a good thing too, because I haven't gone anywhere, right? So this is like the longest stretch I've actually been in Calgary. So this is like 4 months going, the longest time in probably like 10 years I've been at home. So it's really weird for me. But at the same time, for every musician or aspiring artist out there, just, realize that your sacrifice is going to be worth it. It's worth the fight. It's such a fun thing to do, like Gianetta said, when you have that spiritual connection with your audience. That's what you're working for. You just, when you get it, it's perfect and it's everything you've wanted, and then you can walk away and get ready for the next one and get ready to sacrifice more so you can have that exact same experience again, because it's like a drug. Once you get it the first time, you want it a second and a third and a fourth, and you can't get over it. It's like, it's such a great feeling to have when you have that feeling. So to me, it's not hours of practice. It's really, what are you willing to sacrifice to go and get this?
Yeah. I think of it as, I often will say to a student who's considering going into music as a career, is it an imperative? Is it an internal drive that you need to do this? If not, do something else and keep it as a hobby. and that's absolutely valid. There's nothing wrong with it. I also say, and this is the wisdom of one of my sons who said to me, you take the word should and try out of your dictionary. There is no should. You do it because you are making that choice, and it's a decision, not something external that's telling you you ought to do this to get there. No, it's you do that and you don't try, you do it always as well as you can. So if you're taking that first step of putting your fingers on the strings, you're doing it. I'm not trying to play the harp. My first lesson, I'm doing it as well as I can in this moment. And I think that's really essential to recognize that journey, it's not the end goal. And Derek, you said this as well. It is about the journey. We can't approach anything in life as what do I have to do? How many hours do I need to put in? That 10,000 hours thing that came out. What do I have to put in to get there? No, it's about all of the steps along the way. And I talk about this often with students. It's like a baby learning how to walk, and it just does it. There's this internal drive, and it's going to fall over a whole lot of times, but it doesn't just stay lying down. And maybe it'll get frustrated, but it doesn't stay down and it doesn't get all rigid. It just gets back up, and maybe it falls the other direction next time, and gradually the brain figures it out, and then you just keep going. It's step for step for step, and doing it, not trying, just doing it as well as you can in that moment, and being fearless. You really do have to be fearless.
You have to take risks. If you don't take the risk to be on stage, and I get it, people can get nervous and you're hesitant to walk on stage. It's because you're exposed and whatnot. But you have to take that risk because you won't know what the other end's going to look like, the reward. Because that's, like Gina, we're all saying it's the best part of what we do.
That fear, right? That's the fight or flight. That's just our human built-in reptilian brain. That's chemicals that are at work. So it's learning how to manage those. And, people will say, well, how do I get over the nerves? Well, you don't really. You just kind of learn how to manage the chemicals that are doing their thing. And I think actually that's part of the practice as well, is it's not about how many hours you put in, but it's the efficiency of your practicing. And that's why I talk about the neurobiology a lot, because that is really essential to know how that works. How do we get our dopamine shot, that the Pavlov and all those things, getting our payback. Kids who are playing video games, those games are built in to give that dopamine shot. It's all based on those chemical responses. So how do we build that in, not only as teachers for our students, but also in our lives? What's the work we put in that's then going to give us our dopamine shot? And if I say to a student, you need to practice this little spot 3 times, or you do it 5 times, so that at least 3 or 4 of those times is going to be really good. But don't you dare play that next note until you've done it your 5 times. And that's your payoff. Then you get your dopamine shot. Then you try the next thing. So, because it's a long road to actually getting on stage. We want some payoff, all along the way. And we can get that. So, I think the video games is a way to approach that.
But there's also, I think, when you're saying this payoff, there's also this danger right now, because there's so many online competitions. There's just random online competitions that I just keep seeing, and then they invite you. You win and you can come and play in Carnegie Hall. It's like, well, yeah, but I got paid for my own flight and my hotel to go and do this. The competition cost me $50 to enter, but now I got to pay $1,500 to get to New York. I mean, I don't know what the reward in that is, and I don't know who the judges are. I don't know what the quality of the playing is, and so it's very easy to end up with this instant phenomenon, whereas really the journey to Carnegie Hall has always been the greatest musical journey. People always say, I want to play in Carnegie Hall, I want to play in Wigmore Hall, and it's to get that invitation from Carnegie and says, we'd like you to play your concert here, or to go tour with Berlin Phil or New York Phil to Carnegie Hall, that sort of thing. And I think a lot of young musicians now look at these competitions as a way to get there in a quicker way. It's like a shortcut. And it's not the journey that we're talking about, in finding your voice and finding your message and being resilient and having that sacrifice and the determination, all the things that we've talked about. That's what creates the concert artist at the end of the day, when you're there and you've done all the work and it's paid off, and you can celebrate afterwards.
That's incredible. This has been very insightful. I'm very grateful for both of you coming on and sharing your experiences and insights in the world of music, and a little bit more specifically being concert artists. How can people find you? Derek, is there an online portal, social media, or can they come take lessons with you if anybody wants to study with you?
Yeah, I have a whole different bunch of ways you can reach out to me. I'm on Instagram at Derek Chiu Piano. YouTube, it's Derek Chiu Music. I'm in the process of updating my website, which is like my COVID project. So that's www.derekchiumusicstudio.ca, and also I have a .com. I have both .ca and .com for that. And but Instagram is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me, because I can get back to you and then send you DMs and that sort of thing. So
very cool. And Gianetta, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, similar to Derek, digital is great. And so my name, of course, Gianetta Baril, is actually very unusual. So I often say to people, if you don't remember my actual connections digitally, put my name, spelt as it is, Gianetta, and the word harp anywhere in Google. Nobody else is going to show up. So I hated my name when I was young.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah, I hated it when I was young because nobody could spell it. But it
worked out
for that
in your
name.
favor.
Yeah. But my website is forloveofharp.com. So forloveofharp.com. And that's also my Facebook. My professional Facebook page is For Love of Harp, and then my name, Gianetta Baril. And I think, the other ones, I never look at them. I think it's Gianetta Baril is my Instagram, or it might be For Love of Harp. Actually, I think that's For Love of Harp. But I'm pretty easy to find in the world.
We'll have all those links below in the description.
So. can't get away with doing nefarious things because I'll be found.
Oh my goodness. Pros and cons to the name you were given. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for being on, and hopefully this inspires a new wave of musicians and maybe even concert artists, and maybe turn some people away from taking on that profession too. But well, for good. Yeah.
Encourage people to be open to whatever music has place in their life. I think not to set an agenda for it, but to be just open to its capacity to communicate from whichever side we happen to be approaching it from. And by the way, I was going to say, and I do teach, of course, and so that I do a lot of teaching on both online around the world. So easy to find.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Derek. Thank you very much, Gianetta. And hopefully we can have you on future episodes talking about different topics here.
That would be great. It's been wonderful. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, thank you. Let us know. Let me know.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you guys, and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Have a great day.